Okay, hello everybody and welcome to the first session of Crusader Kings 2. Now, just a quick disclaimer out there. I should let you guys know in advance that there's gonna be quite a bit of talking in this video. See, I'm starting up a whole new game series here, and we're dealing with a very vast and intricate game, so there's gonna be a lot of things to go through. There's gonna be a lot of things to talk about. I will obviously be trying my best to keep it as briefly and concisely as possible, but just know that seeing as we've got quite a few things to go over, and also seeing as this is only going to be an introduction video, in other words, there will be no actual gameplay as of right now. That's gonna be in part 1, which I'll release very shortly. But anyways, if you don't want to be around for all my ramblings, if you just want to get straight to the game itself, with no fuss, no bullshit, you are free to skip this whole segment and head over straight to part 1, which again, I'll be uploading it very shortly. But otherwise, feel free to stick around and listen more to how I'm planning to set this new series up. So okay, yes, here we are. We're starting a new game series. This is a game I enjoy very much. It's one I've been wanting to do a game series on for quite some time, actually. This is gonna be a complement to my still ongoing playthrough of Red Dead Redemption 2, so no worries, you need not fear. Red Dead Redemption 2 will continue on as usual. I will continue to edit those videos and put them up here on YouTube as and when I get around to doing it. But in the meantime, I figured I'd add more content to the channel, you know, something for me to enjoy personally in between editing my videos, and also because it just adds that little bit of extra spice to the channel as a whole, to have multiple games going on. So, yeah. Crusader Kings 2, or CK2 as I will keep referring it to as, is a grand strategy game set in the medieval times. As you can see here, we've got a vast cycle of 700 years in human history that we can quite literally play with. And for a history nerd like me, this is an absolute gold mine. Just look at all these times. There's so much to learn from this here game. There's so much history to study and read about, and to literally get to experience yourself through this amazing game. Just like, look, there's all sort of start dates here that you could choose from. You could play in the early days of Charlemagne and his great Frankish Empire. You could play during the feared Viking raids in Europe in the 800s and even the 900s. Or you could start right in the beginning of the Christian Crusades, and even all the way here to the latter half of the Middle Ages, when Christendom was pretty much so firmly entrenched in Europe that it stood on a post. Well, I guess except for the Mongols to the east, the Arabians the Muslims in Arabia and North Africa, but whatever, that's besides the point. Though the final starting year, you'll notice, is 1337, you can play the game as far as the year 1453. Notice 769, 1453. So that's quite literally 700 years. 1453, that's the year when Constantinople fell to the Turks. Constantinople, which later would become modern-day Istanbul. And it also marked like a symbolic end of the medieval times, if you will, because within the next decades, the Renaissance would appear, Columbus would discover America, Leonardo da Vinci, and all that sort of stuff. A whole bunch of things happened that would turn the whole feudal world upside down in a lot of different ways. But that's a whole other story. We're focusing on the Middle Ages here, and we're going to get cracking very shortly. Now, normally when I play games like these, I like to randomize. You know, I love the idea of just being given a hand of cards, if you will, and then make the most of that hand through my own skills and machinations, and also just pure luck. Whether I'm playing as the king of a mighty realm or some shitty chieftain ruling some tribal lands over and nowhere, because that's what makes it a fun experience for me, you know, to make the most of whatever cards you're dealt. But for the purposes of this particular playthrough, I've actually got it more planned out this time as to where I want to play and who I want to play as. More about that's gonna come up very soon. Also, I just want to highlight very quickly, once again, this is only an introductory session. I'm just gonna create my character, lay out my plans and thoughts for this campaign, and just, you know, set all the necessary groundwork in advance for this playthrough. So we don't have to do it in part 1, because when we get to part 1 I just want to get cracking straight away, but as you've noticed by now, there's a few things we need to go over before then. For the time being, I'm just gonna give you a basic overview of what we're gonna do and what to expect. So, we're gonna be starting off in the year 867, the Viking Age. Mainly because it just so happens to suit my particular purposes, but also because I consider this bookmark to be one of the more balanced bookmarks, if you will, as it gives each religious group and each culture a somewhat fair chance at making their own respective mark. Like, you got the Christians here in Europe, they're pretty strong. Not quite as strong as they'll be in later years, though. In later years, they've got pretty much a monopoly on the entire continent, but like here, they're only just starting to rise. And similarly, the pagans to the north and the east over here, they're slowly starting to dwindle, but they've still got quite a prominent grip on much of Europe, so they've still got a fair chance to accomplish something, if only they get their act together. And the Muslim factions down here are on the march as well. You've got the gigantic Abbasid Empire covering most of Arabia. But you've got a bunch of other smaller Muslim factions and rulers as well, who you could make a good playthrough with as well. It doesn't have to be all about the Caliph. And you can carve an empire out here in the steppes too if you want, without having to worry about the Mongols just yet. And it's an open game in India as well, as to which one is going to stand triumphant. The Hindus, the Buddhists, or the Jain religion. Now, of course, you could always debate back and forth as to what's the best place to start, which is the best character to start with, and what places have these and those advantages over others. But all of that is besides the point. I'm choosing to play in 867 because I believe this is the starting point that has the most to offer me, given what my plans are for this campaign. So let's take a look at this time period in more close detail, shall we? By the middle of the 9th century, the Norse raiders and adventurers known as the Vikings had already begun to set their indelible mark on the map of Europe, establishing realms in Russia and the British Isles, and traveling and raiding as far as the Black Sea and the Mediterranean. The Carling rulers, descendants of Charlemagne, ruled mighty realms in France, Germany, and Italy, while the Muslim religion was now firmly established in Spain under the Umayyads. The Byzantine Emperor held on, though suffering under increasing pressure from the Caliphate and the Bulgarians. West of the fractured steppes, the Magyars were poised to make their claim on the Carpathian Basin. Islam was spreading rapidly in Persia under rulers such as the Saffarids, and had penetrated into the Indus Valley, whereas further east, the Hindu Pratihara dynasty was expanding. So yeah, all that sounds very nice and exciting, so let's slowly but surely press on to the game itself, and to the most fun part, the character creation. Because we're going to be playing as our own character. You could play as either one of these historical rulers actually, but we're gonna be creating our own character because that's more fun. So let's turn the political map mode on because that's more fun. Now, CK2 is, as I previously mentioned, a grand strategy game set in the medieval times. But what makes CK2 stand out from your other typical strategy games is that this game focuses less on lands and territories and more on characters. The overarching goal of CK2 is not necessarily to conquer lands, build an empire and rule the world, but you could still do that if you so desire. The overarching goal of CK2 is to create and manage your own character and lead your character's dynasty into glory. And there's a whole host of ways to do that. Yeah, again, you could conquer lands, you could form an empire, you could rule the world through military might. That is one way, but again, that is just one way. If you want to take a more political path, forge alliances and make pacts with other realms, that's possible too. With a bit of diplomacy and a few tactical marriages, you could marry your children off to the children of other nobles. You could branch your family out into your own realm or some realm in the world outside. Look at this vast, amazing world. You could have dukes and kings, maybe even emperors, to be of your own house and rule the various realms of the world, even though you yourself are still sitting patiently around in your own home county. Or if marriage and diplomacy is not your cup of tea and you want to play it a bit more underhandedly, so to speak, you can spy on other characters, you can have them assassinated, you can concoct all sorts of plots and schemes to reward yourself with lands and titles, to rise through the ranks without taking any kind of official action whatsoever. You just plot and scheme behind the scenes. Nobody's any the wiser. Or, if you want, you could play as a more religious kind of character, making it your goal and your mission to improve the standing of your own religion in the world, whether it's through Christian crusades or Muslim jihads, or whether it's reforming one of the various pagan tribes into an organized religion and making a stand against these Christian infidels. Or maybe you want to play as one of the various heresies in Christendom, a Catholic heresy or an Orthodox heresy, and then just spread out within your religious group to the point where your religion becomes the mainstream one. Like as you can see, the possibilities here are endless. And another thing that's important to notice here is that as a dynasty simulator, the game goes way beyond just your main character. When your main character eventually dies, you'll be playing as that character's heir. And usually that's gonna be your oldest son, but you never know. Depending on the situation, depending on the current state of your family, you could end up playing as a daughter instead of a son. You could end up playing as a cousin or a grandchild or an uncle or an aunt, or regardless. Once you lose your main guy, the game still continues, but it continues through the eyes and perspective of whomever is next in line within your dynasty. And the game will continue like that for generations and generations, as long as your dynasty still has living members. Again, as we mentioned earlier, you've got literally 700 years to play with. The game will end by default as soon as you reach 1453, but there aren't any specifically stated goals here. It is ultimately the player that sets the goals and terms for their own playthrough. You play for as long as you enjoy playing. You accomplish what it is you want to accomplish, as much as you feel it's worth accomplishing, and then you go on doing that for however long you desire, be it 10 years or 20 years or 100 years, all the way till game's end. You play to your own heart's content, quite literally. All you really need to worry yourself about is making sure to keep your dynasty alive. If everybody in your dynasty dies, it's game over. But as long as there's at least one member of your house still alive that can still inherit lands and titles, the game goes on. Basically, if you haven't got it already, I could explain to you in very simple terms that this is like a PC version of Game of Thrones. If you watch Game of Thrones, you'll understand the gist of CK2. Working for the betterment of your house, securing your legacy, and using whatever means you have at your disposal to deal with your opponents, but also ensure that your own family does well and stands the test of time. Which can be easier said than done, I'll have you know. So anyways, we're gonna be moving on to our own character. The first protagonist of this here dynasty that we will be playing as. Like I said, normally I'd just be hitting the random button here. See the random dicey kind of thing. Starting whatever land with whatever character the game gives me, and then just make the most of that scenario. Personally, I specifically enjoy CK2 for its roleplay elements. I like to imagine that just as in real life, we don't really get to choose where we're born. We don't get to choose the circumstances we live in. We're just thrown in somewhere, and then we're left to make the most of really whatever miserable life we're born into. And I enjoy playing that game in that similar vein. Just hitting that random button, play as my assigned character, or rather, create my own version of said character, and then just make the most of whatever cards I'm dealt. So let's see. We've got Chief Nimi of Ingria. So he's an Estonian. He's an Estonian pagan, and he doesn't look like he's starting out very well. He's surrounded by hostile tribes everywhere. So that's one. We've got High Chief Miemo of Veps. Okay, he rules a slightly larger realm. He's Finnish. Or you've got Emir Isa of the Shaibanid Emirate. So I can see straight away he's a subject of Caliph Al-Mutas of the Abbasids that I mentioned previously. And then you've got Count Rudolf of Guinness? I'm sure that's how you say it. Where is Guinness? Oh geez, it's right over here. Strait of Calais, over to Dover. A subject of King Charles the Bold of France here. So yeah. There's all sorts of characters of all sorts of ranks and standings you can play as. And I like to just be thrown in somewhere, trying to make the most of whatever circumstances I'm given, and just take it from there. But for this particular playthrough, unlike the way I usually do things off camera, I've got a specific idea for where I want to play. And we are going to be playing in my native Sweden as the local Viking ruler of Skåne. So let's get cracking right away, shall we? We've got this here ruler designer that you can use to create your very own character. I'll get to his backstory and all once we get through all these menus, but first I'm just going to take you through the character creation process. So we're going to randomize an appearance for this guy, because I'm not creative enough to make up something myself. We're just gonna storm through this very quickly. I'll stop randomly and make some adjustments. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Eeny, meeny, miny, mo. That's quite okay. Like, I'm happy with his hair color and how he's turned out. I'm gonna change the beard though. I've never been fond of braids for a beard. There we go. Look. This beard, no braids, and it's quite long enough. Let's go back to that one. There we go. Perfect. Can we change the headgear? This is merely a cosmetic feature. But I don't want him to have headgear. Not yet, anyways. So there we go, that's our guy. And here's his coat of arms. As you can see, pagans usually don't have a lot of options when it comes to coat of arms. The Catholics, they've got like a couple of hundred symbols they can choose from. And emblems that are not available to us. Whereas we're not really spoiled for choice here, but that's fine because I know what I want my shield to look like anyways. I'm gonna pick a coat of arms that I used in a previous playthrough that I thought looked really nice, so I'm gonna be going with it again. I'm not sure why it turned out like this. It wasn't like this before, but no matter. There we go. This is gonna be my my coat of arms. A blue Norse eagle on a green background. Looks cool, doesn't it? Now, the way characters work here is that they've got all these various attributes. They've got skills, they've got traits, they've got a certain level of education within a certain field. And all of this combined together is what makes the game such a great role-playing experience. You've got all these characters with all their own traits, forming their own respective personality. So you've got your own character, you interact with all these other characters of various ranks and social standings, and they've got their own personalities too. And all these little stories you get out of that, all the interactions and anecdotes and plot lines basically, that you get as your character engage with other characters, that's just so amazingly cool. It's like having your own movie, your own TV series, or just your own story laid out before you. Like you could be the next writer of your own Game of Thrones series if you want. Mind you though, you're not obligated to roleplay if you don't want to. Like if role-playing is not your cup of tea and you just want to get stuck in there, get the best character and the best traits, and max out all your stats and get those achievements done. Sure, you can do that as well. You could beat the last boss and beat the game and get to the next level and everything. Because in terms of pure game mechanics, your personality traits here merely serves as buffs and penalties. Or both, depending on whatever setting you find yourself in. Like, let me go through here and show you. You've got, what do we take? If you're, let's say you're a zealous guy. You're very religious. That's gonna give you better standing with the priests. That's one buff. Or, contrary, you could be cynical. You could be a skeptic of religion, and you'd be less popular with the priests. You could be a duelist. You could be more skilled in the arts of combat. Or you could be a scholar. You're more learned and more educated, basically. And then here, because you need to put the traits... sorry about that. You need to put the traits in relation to something, and that's what you've got these here attributes for. As a general rule of thumb, it's useful to think of the game, and I mean the whole game, not just in terms of your own character, but the way in which you manage your whole realm. It's useful to think of them through these 5 central parameters here. So you've got diplomacy, politics, negotiations, and the ability to charm other nobles. You've got martial, which basically represents, as the name suggests, your skills in war, commanding troops, your own personal prowess. Then you've got stewardships, economics, administrations, and basically the administrative management of your realm. And then you've got intrigue, espionage, assassinations, and just scheming behind the scenes. And then you've got learning. Learning, which in this case represents both your level of schooling but it's got to do with religion as well, because back in the days, if you were a learned man, you were a man of the cloth. You were a religious man, so it comes into learning as well. So anyways, each character starts with a base level of 5 in each of these attributes. And then the personality traits of your character will then either add or subtract the amount of points you have in a given field. Like, let's go back to the traits again. You've got Brave, for example. Brave is gonna give you 2 more points to Martial. Being a Craven is gonna decrease points in Martial. Now he's only got 3. Or you could be Deceitful, gain 3 extra points in Intrigue, but lose out 2 points in Diplomacy, since you prefer the underhanded tactics to the straight-up diplomacy and negotiations. I'm gonna take you through all the traits that we've got here. You could pause and see for yourself if you want. Yes, you can see you got lots and lots and lots of various personality traits to choose from. This is a gold mine for role-playing purposes here. You've got good traits, you've got bad traits, you've got these neutral traits too that can be good or bad depending on how you use them. So anyways, let's keep going down here. And there you go. What was I saying? Yes. The personality traits in terms of game mechanical. In terms of game mechanics, they will add or subtract the amount of points you have in one of these given fields. And it makes sense, because you can't really be good at everything. Like every other person, you gotta have strengths, you gotta have weaknesses. Everybody's got their own areas of expertise, and then there are fields where they're not quite so proficient. But again, in strictly game mechanical terms, your traits are merely buffs or penalties. So you can add all these good traits. You could be a genius, you could be attractive, a scholar, to maximize your character's points. And similarly, you can have bad traits. You can have great pox. You could be a leper and depressed and a lunatic, and that's going to take points away from you and subsequently make the life of your character increasingly difficult. But for the purpose of roleplay, I want to think of traits strictly as the name suggests, as traits, as qualities of personality that shapes and forms your character into the individual that he or she is, for both better and worse. And this, my friends, is how I like to play the game. I'm going to be playing as my character in accordance with his traits and with his personality. I'm going to be making decisions and taking a stance in whatever situation he is thrust in, based on the combined sets of skills and traits. I'm going to immerse myself into this whole story, into this whole world, put myself in the shoes of my guy here, and try to see things through his eyes, reason as he would, given his personality, and then I'll be making my decisions as I believe he would make them based on what kind of a person he is. And like I said, it's gonna be for both better and worse. If he's a genius character, I'll make genius decisions. If he's a dumb character, I'll make dumb decisions. I'll play him as an honorable ruler if he's got traits that would make him an honorable person, and similarly, if he's a dishonorable kind of person, I'll play him out in a dishonorable fashion. I'll play him as a crazy madman who likes to torture and kill people. And obviously, I hope it goes without saying, this does not mean I condone of torture and killing in real life. Of course I don't. Of course I don't condone any crimes or ill deeds. This is just a game. This is just me immersing myself in the story that I'm getting, playing out my character in this fictional setting. And it makes sense because it would be within his character to do so. It would be within his character to be dishonorable if he's got dishonorable traits. And it also adds more authenticity and realism to the story, because if you think about it, not all rulers of these times had the most optimal personalities. They were not all bright, they were not all competent. In fact, more often than not, rulers would act to serve their own short-term interests rather than working to secure their family's legacy in the long run. And that's really one of humanity's many shortcomings. We're short-sighted. I mean, just look at our politicians today. They can't see beyond getting re-elected to their next 4-year term. So yeah, on that rather sour bombshell, let's start creating our own guy right here at long last. As I told you at the start of this video, there's a lot to go through. There's a lot to talk about. I hope I haven't bored you already. But anyways, we're gonna give our character... Remember the 5 parameters again. You got intrigue, diplomacy, stewardship, martial, and learning. We're gonna give our character an education in martial. We're gonna pick the skilled tactician, number 3 out of 4. I'm not gonna start him off with the best traits straight off the bat. I do want to give him a solid ground to stand on, but I still want him to work his way up, you know? So he's gonna be a skilled tactician. And we are going to name him... what should we name him? We'll name him Harald. Harald. With a soft Old Norse R in the end. So I guess it'd be like Haraldur. But I'm still just gonna pronounce it as Harald. Just because it's easier for me, okay? And he's going to be of House of Ystad. Now, I've come up with a bit of a backstory for this guy and his name, but I'll get more to that in a bit. Also, what you'll notice is that I'm not going to be handing him any real traits as of yet. All we'll know of him thus far is that he's got a martial education. He's got step 3 out of 4, like I said, so this guy's a warrior. And the only one trait I'm actually going to give him is the wounded trait here. Because this is a style that I used to play off camera. I like to start him off with little traits to leave it open as to how he will develop, rather than deciding in advance that this is going to be this kind of a character or that kind of a character. I want to leave it open. I want to see where the game takes us. Leave it to develop by itself over time. Also, I should add that it also serves a practical purpose, because now I'm able to reduce his age by 11 years. If you noticed, his original age was 28 because of that education, but I cut it down by 11 years to make him 17 by giving him this trait. And that's a game the way has, by the way. It's a way the game has to make sure you don't buff up your characters ridiculously much. Your guy ages faster if you give him all these good traits, whereas you can cut back a few years by giving him negative traits. But it serves a storytelling purposes more than anything, because, well, I'm picturing that the early years of Harald's life should all be shrouded in mystery. Like the first time he's mentioned in any historical records, he's going to be wounded from a fight. And quite unusually, at the age of 17, he will have managed to rise up to the rank Chief of Skåne. He's going to be the sole ruler of this whole territory here. Let me elaborate on this story a little bit as we get onto the game itself. Which we're gonna do right now, actually. I'm just gonna go over the game rules and make sure it's all good. So we've got the major epidemics. Yeah, this all looks good. Mongol invasion at the historical date. We don't want families off. Okay. Yeah, we're taking Shattered Retreat off. We're taking off Army Movement Lock. We're gonna keep the Siege Assault on. We're gonna take off the Defensive Pacts though, because that essentially makes it impossible to expand as an empire. Yeah, everything's looking good. I've got no major changes I want to make as of yet. Yeah, and I'm taking off this releasing prisoner after punishment, because the standard way would have been to leave it on, which means every time you torture a prisoner, they're automatically released, which I find is a bit ridiculous. Like, imagine you've got a cruel ruler you're playing as, and he likes to torture and punishes prisoners. How much sense would it make that after the first torture session they're just automatically released? Like, no, that's not what happened in real life. So I'm gonna turn this one off. I don't even care about the achievements. I'm in it for the gameplay experience, not the Steam achievements. Anyways, everything still looks good. Martial headgear, blood splatter, great works. Yeah, it all looks good. Let's start. Okay, here we go. We're finally in the game. Welcome to Crusader Kings 2. Thanking you very, very much. You're playing as a Norse Germanic chief. By Germanic, they're referring to the religion, because in this here game, the Norse faith is known as the Germanic religion, which I understand why they've named it that way. I wouldn't call it entirely accurate, but hey ho. So let's close all these windows here. There we go. We're not going to worry too much about all these tabs and menus and all that sort of stuff just yet. I'll go over all of that in more detail in the next session. Instead, we're just gonna focus on our guy here. Here he is, Harald of Ystad, Chief of Skåne, loyal subject and vassal of our liege and lord Sigurd Knytling, also known by his moniker Snake in the Eye. That's quite cool. Now, he's the king of these here Danish Isles. He's ruling next to his co-ruler, King Bagsek of Jylland. And for those of you with a bit of historical knowledge, he is one of the sons of legendary Viking Ragnar Lodbrok here. There you can see all of his sons. He's got Ivar Benlös, ruling here in Scotland. Björn Järnskida, ruling here in modern-day Sweden. You got Halvdan Vitsärk of Jorvik. You've got Ubbe Ragnarsson, who I think is down here. He's in the service of Halvdan. And then last but not least for us, King Sigurd here. So what kind of a guy is King Sigurd? This is where the traits and all come into play. So he's trained in the art of stewardship. As you can see, stewardship is the attribute he scores the highest in. He is a Viking. Obviously, he's a hunter. He's diligent, gregarious, zealous, and paranoid. Okay, so he's a hard-working, very sociable kind of guy. Religion is a big deal for him. He's very passionate on spiritual and religious matters. And he tends to assume the worst in people. He's a bit paranoid. He always suspects there's an ulterior motive with everybody that he meets. So yeah, that is our king and liege lord, ruling the Danish Isles and these here lands in southern Sweden. Hold on. Sorry, just got a brief message here. Stop bothering me in the middle of a recording. Anyways, Sigurd here is our lord and king. Well, a high chief rather, because this is a ducal title as opposed to a royal title, but that's besides the point. And then under Sigurd, he's got a number of vassals, one of which is Harald here, who's Sigurd's local representative in Skåne. And now I'll add that I'm gonna be taking certain liberties with history here, if only for the purpose of storytelling. I've been trying to do as much diligent, in-depth research as possible, because I like doing research on different historical periods like this, you know. Like, in order for me to really immerse myself into the story and get a feel of the characters and their surroundings, I need to get myself up to speed with the times they're living in. And this is actually one of the reasons I chose to play as a Viking. Not just because I'm Scandinavian myself and want to claim some sort of entitlement or privilege, if you will, to this particular faction. No, but because for a Scandinavian, I'm actually not quite as studied in my own history as I would want to be. You'll notice through the course of this game that there are a few gaps and holes in my overall knowledge of Viking history and Norse mythology and all that stuff. Because for whatever reason, when I was younger, I was always more fascinated by history further afield. I always thought the grass was literally greener on the other side, you know? I don't quite know why, but that's how I felt. Like, even today, I can spend hours reading Wikipedia articles and history books and other historical sources about whatever random country in the world that happens to take my fancy at the time. But for the longest time in my life, I always thought it was so boring to study the history of Sweden, memorizing all these kings, memorizing a whole host of years, and it meant nothing to me. It was dull. But anyways, I'm digressing a little bit. So I've created this guy here, Harald, the Viking from Skåne, and I've set him to have his place of birth right here on the very southern shores of Skåne. Now, if we're gonna be technical about it, I named him of Ystad, by the way, because there's a town here called Ystad. And if we're gonna be technical about it, the town of Ystad wasn't founded until around the 1240s. Notice we're in the year 867 by now. From 867 to the 1240s, that's still 370 years away from now. Far into the future, when the lads of Scandinavia since long had become Christian. But we're not there just yet. And I still want Harald to be from that vicinity, because the landscape down here is just beautiful. In fact, what inspired me to come up with this whole tale is the fact that I myself went on holidays to Skåne and Ystad not long ago, actually. I went with my family. We spent a good few days just chilling out in town and traveling to some of the surrounding areas here. And they've got such beautiful landscapes too. They've got wide open plains. They've got a gorgeous coastline, beautiful beaches and open sea as far as the eye can see, really, going all the way to the horizon and beyond. And we even went by and visited this old Viking monument nearby. It's called Ales Stenar. I'm gonna save the game actually and write it down here. Ales Stenar. There we go. You can Google it if you want. Basically, it's just an old set of stones making up a monument in the shape of an old Viking ship. But because history is all about context, it's not just about the what. We also gotta ask ourselves why, how, where, when. What are those stones doing there? Why were they erected? What purpose did they serve? Why erect this many stones in this particular location? And truth to be told, we don't really know the answer to most of these questions. We know it was commonplace among the Vikings to make burial mounds in the shape of longships as a means to symbolically grant the dead a ship with which to pass into the afterlife. But this, the monument I was looking at here, is an unusually large monument to be just a mere burial mound. And indeed, no bodies or graves have been found within this vicinity. And this whole area, back in those days, was completely desolate. The major population centers of Skåne was over here to the west. You had Helsingborg, you had Trelleborg and Lund, focused on the western section of this here land. The lands over here to the east, it was completely desolate. Apart from your occasional poor fishing village by the coast, there was literally nothing here. So why would the locals go through all the trouble it meant to carry these 59 blocks of stone, weighing 5 tons each, without our modern day working tools, I'll have you add? Why would they take all these stones, put them on this particular location, in this particular formation? Like, why? Why? We don't know. We just don't know. Sadly, a lot of the history of the Vikings is shrouded in mystery. Because unlike their Christian European counterparts, they didn't make it a habit of writing down their history. Stories would be passed on verbally from person to person, from generation to generation, and as you well know, the older a story gets, the less credible the source is, the less authentic it tends to become. And so a very fundamental aspect of Old Norse consciousness was the prevalence of legends. You know, they would add all these legends and tales of gods and monsters and all sorts of supernatural elements as a way to spice things up, as a way to make these stories more memorable, basically. Just look at Norse mythology. Look at all the stories of the Norse gods, of all the giants and the snakes and the gods, the world tree Yggdrasil holding together all the 9 worlds, Thor, Odin, Ragnarök, and all that kind of stuff. For them it wasn't just mere tales, this was real. People living in these times had an idea of a world that consisted just as much of supernatural elements as it did the more mundane things. And so I thought, keeping in line with that way of thinking, I decided why not shroud my own character's early life into a little bit of mystery, making the very first records mentioning him, to describe him as merely an unusually young ruler of Skåne at the mere age of 17. A young ruler of Skåne, and all we know of him is that he's been wounded in a fight. You can see the blood's covered here by his hair and his forehead. So yeah, he's a young warrior in the service of King Sigurd. He's somehow managed to take over the entirety of Skåne, and thus far, that's all we know of him. He's been wounded, so clearly he's been in some sort of fight. But what exactly was the nature of this fight? Who did he fight? Maybe he fought with the other local lords and chiefs to stomp out his authority as the sole chief of Skåne, which would make sense because even though it's represented as a single county in the game, there was a whole host of local tribes and chiefs within this land. So to go to them and tell them you're gonna obey me and you're gonna obey your king, he would have probably had to teach them the hard way. So that's a plausible theory, or maybe it's something else. Maybe his village was raided and his whole family was butchered with only him still standing, which is possible because, as you can quite clearly see, the Chronicles makes no mention of his family. He's literally got no parents, he's got no grandparents, no children, no wife. He is the sole member of his house. So yeah, that's possible too. Or maybe he makes no mention of his own family because he split with them for whatever reason. Maybe they planned on disinheriting him, and then he took matters to his own hands and had them all put to the sword. That's a less plausible theory though, because the Vikings took very seriously to kinslaying. It was like one of the most grave sins, if you will, that you could commit. And had Sigurd found out about this, there's no way that our hero Harald here would have been appointed the chief of Skåne. Like no way. But then why else are there no records of Harald's family anywhere to be found? Even Harald himself wasn't known to speak of his own family. Like, why is that? I'll leave that to your own imagination. I'll allow you guys to give your own interpretations about Harald's early life, his family, and how he, at the mere young age of 17, managed to seize control over the entire region of Skåne. One thing we do know for sure, as we've seen in his name is of Ystad, is that he originates from the very location of the modern-day town of Ystad. Now, most likely, this is probably a post-construction created in some chronicle written hundreds of years after his death, because, like I said, the settlement of Ystad did not exist at this current time. But like I also said, I do like to take some historical liberties, just for the sake of storytelling. And I really enjoyed the landscapes around Ystad. I really enjoyed watching those stones, walking along that coastline. So I decided he just has to be from Ystad. He has to be from Ystad, or whatever Ystad was before the Christian city was founded. So whatever. Just to make matters more straightforward, I'm just gonna say he built himself a stronghold somewhere here. A stronghold on the southernmost coast of Skåne, an area that would later become known as Ystad. And so in honor of his own heritage, he adopted the family name of Ystad. And indeed, all future members of his clan would become known under that name. So yeah. That's my character. That's my backstory. And that was my long-winded ramble about this upcoming playthrough. I'm sorry it's taken me all this long. I'm sorry I've ended up talking so much for such a long time. Like, if you've stayed and kept on listening to the end of this video, I owe you a massive thank you. I'd not have blamed you if you'd wanted to just wander away and tune out of this video out of sheer boredom, just due to me talking so goddamn much. I'm not used to talking this much. Anyways, we're gonna end it right here. I've given you a basic overview of how CK2 works. We've created our character. I've given you a bit of backstory. So in the next session, we're gonna start the game properly. We're gonna unpause the button here, we're gonna let time roll, and I'm going to, in as brief term as possible of course, I'm gonna outline my objectives, my long-term objectives, my short-term goals for Harald here, and his dynasty. Not that anything's gonna be solidly written in stone or something like that. I tend to be quite flexible in my gameplays, depending on where the game takes us. But obviously you gotta have at least an estimate of where you're going, some sort of sense of what you want to do. But anyways, that'll all be next time. So I hope you'll join me as we will be unleashing this campaign for real, and hopefully partake in a saga, a most epic saga, about a great dynasty that will stand the test of time. So I hope you'll all join me for that. Goodbye, good day, good night, and good evening, whatever the time of the day you may find yourself in. And I'll see you all next time.